I made it. Totally late. Sorry, forgot to let you know that I would be late. My son had an appointment and she ran over because she started late. So I thought I'd be home in time. Anyways, I'm here now. Apologies if you were here and missed the live beginning and then therefore missed the live. But we're here now and we're going to do it. We are on week 21, 2, 3, 4, 25 of the quilt. If you are making the blocks and putting them in order, this is the middle. This is the middle block. So I am your host, Cheryl Arkeson. This is the Quilters Playcation Adventure Sewalong Rainbow Edition. We are doing one improv block a week. We're using 6 rainbow fabrics. Rainbow order or not is entirely up to you, but 6 rainbow fabrics plus 1 background fabric or a variety, as you can see in the one behind me here. But we're just playing with different improv techniques. We're having fun, joining each other, hanging out, doing all that sort of stuff. So again, I apologize for being late. Week 25 is dead center in my quilt. If you're making all the blocks and putting them in order, it's dead center. So Michelle, I know I promised you we would do something with the triangles. Don't worry. That will probably work for, actually, I think it could work for next week. Now that I'm looking at these 2 blocks, the idea I have for those triangles, I think it will work for next week. But I wanted to have something different because this was the center of the quilt. Something that would work, not necessarily as a focal point, but just look really good in the center. So that's what we did. So there's a little bit more sewing with this one. So I'm going to get right into it. We can chit chat while we're sewing because, you know, it's me. How can I not chit chat? I have an excessive amount of rulers sitting on my cutting mat that I don't need. So get my iron turned on. I literally ran in the house. I had to be rude to a neighbor who was trying to ask me something about zucchini plants. I was like, I gotta go, I'm late. I'll talk to you later. Okay, let's bring you over here. I always say enough chit chat and then I chit chat forever, right? So that's me. There's our ladies. We are gonna head down here to the table. Maybe zoom in just a little bit. So what do we need for today's block? Let me show you today's block in the black and white version. There you go. You can see it. I had it sketched out. I'd kind of done 2 versions and we may end up doing this other version too. This was with just wedges of the rainbow fabric, and this one, it's the wedges in between all of the background fabric. So that's what we have here. I chose to put my wedges in rainbow order. So you can see what I have prepped below. I think I didn't make it the other way, but I think this is still a good way to do it, of having a single background piece that we're slicing and inserting these wedges into. It will not stay perfectly square, so know that, but it helps give it a little bit of structure, and then you're not trying to imagine the wedge shapes that you need. And then I've cut wedges from each of my fabrics. They are actually, some of them are scraps, so they're a little bit longer. And this one was actually a strip, but I turned it into a wedge there. So what kind of sizes do you need? I cut my square, my background square, in this case, about 3 inches larger than I need. I did the same thing. How much did no, I cut it 4 inches larger than I needed on the black and white one, and ended up trimming off, a fair amount, but not too much. So I think that rule of thumb, about 3 inches larger for this background square, will be a good kind of rule of thumb. It should give you enough wiggle room that you can play around with, what's the word I'm looking for? Play around with the structure that you're going to go in. So I'm just going to decide what order I want my strips in. I was looking at the previous block, and I have the previous block going this way currently with the pink on this side. So I'm going to switch out my rainbow order. I could obviously rotate the previous block, but in my head, that's where it was. So I just want to have these kind of roughly placed where I want them to start. And I'll show you what that's going to do for me. So I'm going to roughly have them like this. I want to do the center ones first because they're going to dictate sort of that distance for these ones on the edges. So now that I know that, I'm just going to pull these edge ones aside. And I'll probably do this green one. Now for your wedges, in terms of length, you want them to be about that longer length. So if we have a square that's 3 inches roughly bigger, you want these wedges to be roughly that length. Obviously on some of them you're going to trim off more than others, but I found, particularly making the last block, having that little bit of wiggle room will go a long way. So I'm going to go ahead and layer these right sides up just so I have that line, and roughly halfway in my block, but on that sort of angle. So it's not straight up and down the block. I want it to be kind of a little bit to the side. I made that first cut. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew this seam together here. So it's a lot of sew, press, cut, sew, press, cut, sew, press, cut. I won't bother showing you the sewing because it's not that exciting. But I do know that I have a fresh bobbin in here, so we should be good the whole way. Because the block does take a little bit longer, but not too bad. We should probably finish about the same time we usually go. Okay, so we go here. Now, before I press it, a couple of notes about pressing. On my first one, I actually ended up pressing them all in the same direction, which means all towards the right. You can press them all towards the, I don't know, it's almost like a spark kind of idea. So then it's going to pop up off of it. You do run the risk of having some pretty bulky seams down here if you do that. As long as you know that and you're willing to put some effort into managing that bulk, meaning paying attention to where everything is and not getting it all kind of caught up. Or you can press it all to the background so that your spark kind of recedes a little bit. That's what I'm going to do on this one. The last one, as I said, I pressed all in the one direction, but this time I'm going to press them all towards the background, just for something different. It really kind of doesn't make a huge difference, but they do pop up if you press towards them. But because there could be some overlapping in some of our seams, we don't always want to do that. But you may not want that, you know, shadow. It's not really shadowing, but it is a little bit in the seam. So we've done the one, and then I'm going to go ahead and do this second one. Now, to keep this square, you could go ahead and kind of place it so your background fabric is nice and kind of square, and then cut again. That's going to keep this square, but I found that it doesn't take it too far out of square the other way. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut my strips. I'll show you on the next one what I mean by, you know, kind of getting it into square. As with a lot of this improv work, there's more than one way to do it. Right? It's not a my way or the highway kind of a scenario. Okay. So let me press that. Same thing, I'm going to press towards the background on this one. And you'll see what I mean about it kind of rotating out. It's seriously not the end of the world at all, right? But you can see Let's kind of zoom out a little bit. It's not staying, you know, perfectly square and square. Again, not really a big deal. I didn't find it to be a big deal on the other one, but you may feel differently. So here's when I was talking about the pressing direction. Even when I cut for this second piece, because I've pressed towards the background, when I do that again, I'm going to have bulk there anyways. So just know that you're going to have it. Pay attention to it so that, you know, you're not making life a little bit more difficult. So you can see if I kind of imagine the halfway line in between the yellow and the green, I'm going to go that way. I'm just going to line that up, give myself a nice straight edge. I'm not measuring, it's just about giving myself a straight edge. And then I'm going to cut or sew. This is what I mean about right down here. You can see there's going to be a few of those fabrics in my seam allowance. That's fine. I'm just going to pay attention to it, keep it as flat as I can when I press it. That's when flatter is going to be your friend on the pressing front. Okay, so I have that second one, right? I'm going to go ahead, and I like to kind of press as I go. I just think it's going to help overall with the whole block. So I press to set the seam. That helps me turn it into the direction that I want it nicely. Okay, now this piece hasn't moved. I'm just going to move this over a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and I can just sew those together, and you can see how that top kind of gets a little bit of a curve to it. Again, not a problem. But if you want to keep it a little bit more sort of on square, what you can do is what we've done for a lot of other blocks. We can lay these two blocks right sides up, right? They're both right sides up, and we can cut a nice fresh cut. And what this is essentially doing is removing part of the wedge that's behind, you know, what would have been there from the background fabric. So it's up to you, whichever one feels more comfortable, more right. Both work. All right? Both work. I have just realized that I've left my glasses upstairs before I started sewing. So it's a good thing it's improv work and I don't have to be super precise on my cutting. And that I really only have the lowest level of readers, so it's not the end of the world. Okay, so that's 2 strips in, and we're just going to repeat that process. Right, we'll go one side, then the other, and then the edges. Pressing after each one because that helps us make a nice smooth cut. So I know I need the blue here now. Now this time I want to change the angle a little bit, but you're going to notice, see, I'm not quite tall enough there, meaning my blue strip isn't long enough to go all the way to the edge. Is that going to be a giant concern? Probably not, but I am just going to check, you know, if I go here and I end up having to cut off the top of the block, am I going to have enough on the bottom? And I think I am. So I'm going to go ahead and go for it. If it ends up being not enough, I will just cut a new strip and put it in. That's what I had to do on my first block. So it takes a little bit more time, but it's not that big of a deal. Go ahead, cut that, flip it over, and sew that together. Sometimes I like to show you the oopsies because I feel like a lot of us get them at times. And so if you can see that A1, that I can make mistakes too. Nobody is infallible. But also that most of the time the fixes are pretty easy. That it's really not that big of a deal. Okay, again, we're pressing as we go. And then we add that background piece on. Definitely seeing some bulk in pressing here, so I'm just going to pay a little bit more attention. Right, bulk is bulk. You can't do away with it all. But I do feel like if I had pressed that the way I pressed on the first one to the one side was a good idea. So I'm going to go ahead, just going to straight. I'm not going to bother cutting a new cut. They're both straight because they were cut with a ruler. I'm going to go ahead and cut there. You can see I have here at the bottom a little bit of extra fabric and bulk. I'm actually just going to trim that off because that little kind of weird edge now, that will be contained within my seam allowance, but I don't have all that extra fabric in the seam allowance. That's going to help manage some of that bulk. I do think this block has some pretty good potential in repeat. Some better than others in this Sewalong, but this is one of the ones that I think really does. I also think it would be really good if you had a lot of scrap strips, because each one of your, you know, rays, I guess we could call them, what are we calling them? Sparks, rays. They're not quite fireworks, but you could easily turn this into a firework block. I'll talk about that at the end. Remind me if I forget. So there, now I have the blue. I'm going to go over on the other side now and do the orange. Okay. Now how big my orange, nice, long, super long strip, how big this ends up being and how much you end up trimming off is really going to have a big, is really going to be impacted by how wide you made your wedges in the first place, and then how much of an angle you put these on. I'm having them all kind of join up at the center because I want that, right? So I'm going to go there. I do have more than I need, so trim that off. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut this. But I want them to meet at the center. I want them to look like they're kind of all coming out from each other there. So that's what I'm going with. These third and fourth wedges are the longest seams that you have to sew on the project, on the block. But yeah, I think, to go back to my previous point, if you have a whole bunch of scrap strips, which I do, I've actually been sewing with them this week, this could be really fun. You could do a really neat scrappy block, a scrappy version of this, right? Have a single background, or even, you know, have a few different backgrounds, you know, one block in one background, one block in another, however you want. And then you could have all different sort of multicolored scrappy rays coming out from them. Okay. I'm going to press this. I feel like my iron wants a little bit more water in there. Remember, I love steam in my iron, particularly with the improv work. I think the steam just helps us coax things when they want to be a little bit tricky. But that flatter pressing spray is also very helpful in that regard. steam iron and a wool pressing mat. Well, not a favorite smell, certainly is helpful. Okay, let's look here. See, because I sliced through this, I have some yellow here. I don't want that. I want it to be the individual rays coming out. So I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to do that layered cut so I can simply get rid of that yellow. It will disappear once I make the cut. But before I do that, I just want to double check that I'm still good on width if I do that. And I'm more than good because I'm going to end up scoring up to 10.5 inches. So I still have lots of wiggle room here. I always like to make sure I have as much wiggle room as possible without it feeling wasteful. So hopefully by me pre-making the blocks for you, I figure out some of that stuff for you so that I'm helping you minimize the scraps or waste that you have at the end of the day. There's always going to be some. It's improv work. There will always be some trimming. But just because you've trimmed doesn't mean that what you trimmed off was a waste of your time. Sometimes that's what you needed to get to where you were going. Also, those scraps are just potential for something else, right? Look at these Sewalongs. There are so many interesting blocks that I've designed based off of what we had left of scraps. Okay, so now we have 4 strips in here. We need to add 5 and 6. So now these are going to be these ones coming out here. Now, obviously, these are not going to be as long that we use, right? I'm going to have lots of extra here. So I have some choices. I can come in and have this be a bit thicker down here and a little bit less there. So I'll trim off the bottom, or I can come here with a different thickness. I'm actually going to go in so it's a little bit thicker just for variety, right? Cut off this little bit of extra on the bottom. And then I'm going to go ahead and walk myself around. Go ahead and use the thicker part and trim that there. All right, a few more seams and we are done this block. So I am going to show you from the back as I sew. Just let me get it started. Okay, I do want to bring you over here to show you the sewing. Okay, so I have my purple underneath here, just lined up, right? Edge on edge. And when I get down here, see, I have all of this fabric. So the first one I can see is pressed out there. I have all of these which are overlapping. And I kind of want to see where maybe I've either done a little bit of sewing or that I can kind of hold it in place right now in a way that makes sense, that feels as smooth as possible. So there we go. So by doing it from that side, I could see what was going on, right? So I had to do a little stitch, but that kind of was where everything was going anyways, so it worked out nicely. And then I'm going to trim off this sort of little dangly bit, which will also help it lay flatter. Okay, you can already see right there that I'm going to have to do a little bit of different trimming like I did when I added the orange piece. That's all good, as long as I know, right? Pay attention as you go so you know these things, and it's not a big deal at all. Alrighty, looking good. Okay, so we have this here. I don't want this underneath there, so I'm going to go ahead and layer that so I can make this cut just going to continue to double check on my width. Yeah, I'm still got tons of wiggle room, which means I will be trimming stuff off. Again, that's okay. It's okay. Flip that and sew there. See, we're talking about, that's not a waste. That's a usable strip. We'll find some use for it. If not on this project, on another one. We always find a way. And remember, if you're not going to find the way, someone else will. Here's my moment where I get to do a tiny bit of shameless self-promotion. If dealing with all of those little bits and the little scraps and you think, oh, these are such a waste, feels like that, I got the class for you. Hire me, because they don't have a standalone version of it yet. Recorded, that is, so I teach it live. But hire me to come in and teach my Scraptastic workshop. And then you will learn how to use all those little bits. And we'll have a lot of fun. I just taught it for a guild out of New York State last week. Such a great time. Lots of people started the class hating their scraps. By the end of it, pretty darn excited for them. Okay, over here as well. Now, even though the orange is skinnier, I don't want to kind of do bookend of the wider. So, right, I can play with where I put my pink strip. I am going to put it with the skinnier part of it, although it is kind of cut a little bit bigger. There, and I'm going to go ahead and cut that and insert it. Right, so you'll notice I'm not paying attention to what angle is it. Is it a 60-degree angle or a 30-degree angle or whatever? I'm just cutting where my eye feels like it feels good. That's all. Don't have to get too fancy or overexcited about it. Now again, I'm going to bring you over and show you sewing from the back side. This time I'm starting down here just because that's the way it works. Again, continuing on with the fold lines I had already made. And coming around. Okay. Now that we're on these last ones, let's move you over to pressing. I didn't show you earlier, but we will just look at it quickly now. Right? We always want to take that freshly sewn seam, put our iron on it, and set that seam. That little bit of heat helps us make that next, when we're pressing, whether we press open or into one side, just helps make a crisper line as we go down there. So you can see with careful pressing, this is staying pretty flat, even with all of that bulk in there. So now we just have to sew that last one over here. Where are we at? There's this extra fabric right here. You know what I'm going to do? I'm actually just going to remove it. And then there's kind of a weird, because that was folded back in the seam allowance, I'm just going to unfold it and with my scissors trim that off. So now I got rid of bulk before I even sewed, and I didn't have to do that whole big recut. But it's taking the time on little details like that, which does wonders for keeping your block neat and having it lay flat and not be super frustrating when both you're sewing and you're quilting at the end. Okay, that was our last one. I'm going to go ahead and press that, and then we will square it up so you can really see how it looks once it's cleaned up a little bit. And we can have that discussion about how a little bit of wiggle room goes a long way. Okay, so make sure it's got a good press. Use your flatter pressing spray if you need to, or even just for like a little extra push on it. Love my flatter. No affiliation whatsoever, but I highly recommend it. So a few spritzes. So sometimes when I use the flatter, I don't know how many of you have teenagers in your lives, but there's always the joke about the boys and their Axe body spray. But I gotta tell you, teenage girls with their misty perfume like that, right? I was taught to put on perfume 1, maybe 2 spritzes at most. These girls are like, they're using a more diluted formula, so you can use more, but it's still, the house still smells after my daughter has left. Let's just say that. So, okay, so I want to go ahead and square this up. These blocks are 10.5 inches. So what I want to do is down here at the bottom somewhere, so that I still have that kind of connection of them kind of coming out from a central point. I'm going to see where I can put that kind of 10.5 inch point. Now I have, you know, I can get from that 10.5 inches, basically I've got 12.5 inches wide. So I have more wider than I need. I could also push up, but if I push up, then I'm cutting off all of this kind of central point. That's a design decision. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but I like, even though there's more bulk there, I like that it kind of comes all from the same spot. So if you're trying to figure out, well, where should I base it off of? Remember, those first 2 cuts, somewhere in between is the center of the block. So if I want 10.5 inches, I'm going to kind of eyeball where 5.25 inches is in the center of the block here, right? So in between those 2 center wedges. Doesn't have to be. I could play around with where this is, but that's what I'm going to go with. There. Make sure I have 10.5 inches on all parts. And it's still going to create a really interesting block. Now this is going to be, yeah, it's doing exactly what I was about to say. Because there's this bulk right here, it's a lot easier for the ruler to slip. So make sure you are holding it on the edges so it can't slip. Thumb off, pinky off, or for the left-handed people, you're going to be holding it with your right hand there. And then really kind of push down with those fingers so that it can't move. And I'm going to go up and I'm going to go across. So you can see width-wise, I have wiggle room, but not as much. Height-wise, I have a little bit more. I want to kind of leave these pieces so you can see, but what a difference just cleaning up those 2 sides makes. And we have a partly cloudy day, so the light keeps changing in here. So there, now I can line up, you know, 10.5 inches here, 10.5 inches here, hold my ruler in place, and go up and across. Now I'm going to go across that twice because there was a lot to cut through here. Okay. So that, my friends, is what we are left with. Right? So we get this kind of spark. It really kind of, like, I'm going to call this sunrise, right? Because it's like the rays coming out as the sun is rising. So we're going to call this a sunrise block. And that's what I'm left with. So not a heck of a lot, enough that I had wiggle room in where I squared it up, but not so much that it felt like a giant kind of waste, right? I could do some fun things like sewing these scraps together, right, like this, and creating a interesting little shape, right? Who knows? But for now, I will just put these with the rest of my scraps and enjoy the block I have. Now, the one thing I did want to mention, let me grab one of those scraps actually. Because remember I was talking about how this could be adapted for a fireworks sort of influence. What you would want to do in that case is you're just going to have your wedges that are your filler pieces. You're going to piece them with bits of the background in them, right? So you're going to have here, I will just simply cut these to demonstrate it for you, right? So that yellow one will have been pieced so that there's some wedges, and then maybe the orange one has one in there, right? So it just kind of creates a different dynamic kind of look to give that fireworks sort of effect. And you'll want to do those first before you do other things. So there you have it, folks. That is our, we'll call it sunrise block for the week. Let's say goodbye to the ladies. I'm going to flip you around. Hi. Hey, guess what? We're still having the water crisis in the city, hence the hat in there. Oh, I see a question here asking if I'm using hand dyes on these. No, I am not. These are Moda Grunge fabrics, and I feel like somebody asked me a while ago which ones they were. So I will try to get those posted somewhere, but they are Moda Grunges. So all commercially available, but they kind of mimic a bit of a hand-dyed effect. So they're very quite pretty in there. I'm just going to go through and see if I missed any other questions there. Oh, I think we're good. I hope you're all having a great week. I feel like I'm a little bit calmer this week. It's been a little crazy here. Just as I was at physio yesterday for my hip, and she's like, "You've just had a lot of life lately," as I was listing off the things. And I'm like, yes, that's a good way to put it. I've had a lot of life lately. But one of the things that is both nerve-wracking and yet easier at the moment is, if you check out my shirts, these are the shirts we had made to cheer on my daughter last year when she was traveling for modern pentathlon to the World Championships. So one of the things that made our lives a little bit hectic was getting her ready to leave on a trip last week. Making sure she had everything she needed, all the stress that went with putting your 16-year-old daughter on a plane across the world to an area of the world that's not super calm right now. So yeah, so she is competing this week in the World Championships, Junior World Championships. So that's U22. She's only 16, so she's probably one of the youngest competitors there for modern pentathlon, which is her chosen sport. Today she had the relay, women's relay. And so this time there was another girl there. So she was very excited because they got to do a women's relay. And they were 10th in the world, which is awesome. So proud of them. These kids work so hard and they're such great teammates to each other. They're fantastic kids. I'm not choking up because I'm emotional, although I did have a moment there. I just choked on something. And so she is now sleeping, should be sleeping, because she has her individual event tomorrow, qualifiers. So the top 36 make the finals. Again, she's 16 in a U22 world, so we'll see how she does. But so there's the stress of her getting her going this week, the stress of her being gone. And last night I could not sleep at all. And I knew the competition was starting. So I was up checking my phone constantly, and menopause and all the other fun stuff. So we're having a little bit more of a chill week, and I don't have to drive anybody anywhere because of the water crisis. I was having to drive her out of the city for swim practices. So that was taking up hours of my day to do that. So this week is a quieter week. My oldest daughter has been working with my husband, and I'm here sewing with you. And after this, I'm going to make some lunch, watch a Ted Lasso with my son who's having a rough day, and then make some quilt backs because I got myself a long arm appointment booked tomorrow. So I want to do some quilt backs. And speaking of Egypt, if you saw my previous post, I did decide on this fabric. It's just not big enough, so I have to basically add a border around it, which is totally cool. I think that's going to look great, and it'll be nice on the back of the quilt. So now that I've blabbed long enough, this has gone on long enough, especially because I was late, I just want to say thank you to all of you. We're now past halfway of this Quilters Playcation Adventure Sew-Along for 2024. It is fantastic, really an enjoyable experience for me. I hope it is for you. I want to bring as much peace and joy and rainbow love and playing to all of you. So thank you for the comments about my daughter. Make sure you're following me. You probably are if you're on this, because I will post updates there as well. So goodbye, everybody. Have a wonderful week. We will see you next week when it will be July already. And we're halfway through the calendar year as well, but we're over halfway through our Adventure Sew-Along for now. So take care, everybody. I am Cheryl Arkison. This is the Quilters Playcation Adventure Sew-Along 2024 Rainbow Edition, week 25. Happy to be your host. Have a good one.